So on Sunday this week, we were talking about oversharing, those moments we find ourselves in where we maybe blurt something out, or we share a bit of our story, or we tell something that's a little private, and then immediately we kind of want to take it back. Now, sometimes that happens because we're being vulnerable, and that's uncomfortable for us, and sometimes we want to withdraw from that. But there are then those moments where we share something, maybe with the wrong person or in the wrong setting, and almost immediately what we realize is this isn't just being exposed. The fact is we have exposed ourselves, we made ourselves vulnerable in the wrong kind of moment, or maybe to the wrong kind of person. Someone who's not going to treat our story with the dignity that it deserves, someone who's not going to respond to us with empathy, but instead maybe condescension, or maybe even apathy, or just trying to brush us aside. And that can be a really vulnerable moment. Probably all of us has found ourselves there. That's why we talked about this in the series, My Big Loud Mouth. But I wanted to come back at it here with a couple things that you can reflect on when you find yourself in that moment. You've just shared something. Maybe you've made yourself vulnerable and somebody hasn't treated that well. What can you do to process that? How can you learn from that going forward? So a couple things here. First, I think the one thing we need to remember here is this is not your fault. If you have shared something personal, something private, something vulnerable, and somebody hasn't held that with the respect that it deserves, that's not your fault. Yes, it might have been a mistake. You may have chosen poorly to share that, but what they've done with that information, the way that they've responded to it, the way that they've carried it, that's not your responsibility. That's not your fault. That's not something that you can blame yourself for. And sometimes the first step in getting over this is saying, okay, I can't take the blame for this. That's the choice that they've made. All that I can do is begin to learn from this and make better choices, make healthier choices for me going forward. And so sometimes actually realizing that it's okay to hurt, it's okay to realize that someone has not treated you well, and this is not because you are the problem. Maybe it's because they are, maybe it's because they don't have the maturity to deal with the situation, but this is not your fault, and it's okay to let go of that guilt over what's happened to you and over the way that you feel. The next step then is still to learn from that moment. Sometimes our wisdom is hard-won. And sometimes we only learn things after having to feel the consequences of the choices that we make. So it's not your fault. You can't carry the choices that someone else makes, but you certainly can learn from them. This is something we talked about in the very first week of this series. God never does anything to us, nothing painful to us to teach us a lesson. But God is always there in the midst of it, helping us to grow, to gain wisdom, to come out the other side a better, stronger version of ourselves. Well, it's the same kind of thing here. Wisdom is sometimes hard-won. And if you find yourself in a moment where someone has taken your story, they've not treated it well, there is still a lesson that you can learn about what's appropriate to share and where it's appropriate to share. And sometimes the way we come through that, the way we learn those things, the way we become a little more guarded in a healthy way is because of those hard lessons. And here's the third thing we need to apply. When we overshare, when we put ourselves in the wrong type of vulnerable situations, the thing that we need to learn is that the reason we are doing this is because we don't have the emotional health and the emotional support that we need. The reason that we're oversharing is because we're not sharing in carefully chosen relationships. We haven't cultivated the right kinds of spaces where we know that we are safe and we know that we can open up and we know that we can be vulnerable. Probably what's happening is we're bottling a lot of things up. We're not talking about it with anyone. And then when it seems like there's an opportunity, it all just comes tumbling out. And that can be a symptom of the fact that we're not cultivating the kinds of supports, the kinds of emotional spaces, the kinds of healthy relationships we need in our lives. And so when we find ourselves in that moment where we have overshared, and now we're paying a little bit of a cost for it, we're feeling injured, we're feeling hurt because of the way someone has dealt with that, we can remember that it's not our fault. They make their choices. We can understand that sometimes wisdom is hard learned and there's something for us to take away from this. But often the thing that that we need to take away is that we need to be more intentional, we need to be more diligent, we need to work harder at creating the kinds of relationships and the kinds of spaces where we can be more proactive in sharing our story. Who is it that you can go to say, this is what I am going through? Who is it that you can turn to say, this is what I'm experiencing and I need your support in this moment? Where are those people who you can say, I need to share something, but it's going to be hard for me to say, and I need you to be there. I need you to be kind. I need you to be there as a support for me in this moment. Because if you don't have those, and you keep bottling it up, and you keep holding it inside, what's going to happen is eventually you're going to reach that tipping point, and you're going to end up sharing your story with someone who doesn't deserve it, or in a place where it's not quite appropriate. And so as we build these supports, as we are less vulnerable with lots of people, but we are more vulnerable with the right people, we will find ourselves in a more healthy emotional space, we'll find ourselves sharing appropriately, and we'll find ourselves supported in the kinds of ways that we actually need to flourish and thrive as we go through the things that life throws at us. So if you have found yourself oversharing, don't get mad at yourself. It happens. Every single one of us have those moments where we wish we could take things back. But look at that, learn from that, and begin to cultivate the moments where you can share in appropriate ways with the people who are going to support you. That will get you to where you need to go in a much healthier way than simply blurting out your story all the time. Remember, vulnerability is not just about what you share. It's about who you share it with and when you share it with them. All those kinds of healthy boundaries and guidelines and choices that we make will help us be more vulnerable with the right people in the right moments. And that's what we really need. Not eyes on our problem, not attention, but real vulnerability with people who care about us deeply.